I think that there has been speculation about whether this is a Kissinger in reverse strategy, and as Vijay laid it out, very plausible as one of the motives for Trump's overture towards Russia. But I would also say, and I'm not saying this to disagree with Vijay, because I'm not, but I do think we're in a very early stage of a process with the Trump administration, and at least for us, for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, we're trying to emphasize that which we feel confident that we know, and also to highlight parts of the process which, because it's an unfinished process, we can't know. And I want to talk about that. First of all, let's try to politically characterize Trump, or the Trump administration, in the second term. It's quite different, as Vijay pointed out, quite different than the first term. In this term, there is a coalition of Trump supporters who have come together and constitute the core of the administration. So, who are they? Who are those people in the Trump administration? First of all, everyone is talking about Elon Musk and the coterie of billionaires. And they are one part of the Trump coalition, and a very close part of it, because Elon Musk has become very close to Donald Trump. He's also aligned with the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. Scott Bessent, like Musk, is a billionaire. There are about 10 or 11 billionaires in the Trump cabinet. And this is a new phenomenon in US politics, that the capitalist class, as a ruling class, has additional impact and representation by a small clique of billionaires. And Elon Musk is highly ideological and actually pro-fascist. He is pro-fascist. He, like Peter Thiel, David Sachs, and a few others, come from the racist, fascist South African apartheid regime. They feel this is their time. They are promoting white Afrikaners in South Africa. They are at war against black people in Africa and black people in the United States. So Elon Musk wants to plunder, pillage, loot the national treasury. The US budget every year is $6.75 trillion. It's a very big number, 6.75 trillion. They want their hands on that, but it's also profoundly ideological for Musk. Musk is pro-fascist. Another wing of the Trump coalition is Steve Bannon, who's not officially in the White House, but he is a major factor within the MAGA Trump coalition. Bannon represents America First, the America First movement, which, for those of you who might or might not know, in 1939, 1940, in the United States, America First was a real movement. It was a mass movement that was supportive of Hitler and Mussolini and demanded that the US not go into war in Europe. In other words, America First meant don't go to war in Europe, because these people were actually supporters of fascism. In Madison Square Garden, in the heart of New York City in 1939, 30,000 people came together under the banner of the swastika and to support Hitler. Major figures in the US ruling class supported Hitler until the war started. Probably half of the capitalist class looked sympathetically at Germany. The tendency towards fascism wasn't simply in Europe, it was also in the United States. And I think we have to recognize, I agree with Vijay that we don't want to be demoralized, but I do think we should recognize that fascism is an organic element of decaying capitalism. And you see the rise of fascist movements in Brazil, or semi-fascist movements in all parts of Europe, including in Germany. Elon Musk is openly promoting the victory of AfD in Germany. Now, AfD doesn't say we are Nazis. They disguise their fascistic elements, and it's not a monolithic party, but there are certainly fascist elements in AfD. Same in France. I was talking to Bert in Belgium. The fascist party in Belgium is the second, correct me if I'm wrong, the second biggest party in Belgium right now. What Trump hopes to do is to have a political realignment such that all of Europe comes under the direction of far-right parties similar to the kind of party that he is hoping to construct in the United States. And this tendency towards ultra-rightism, whether one calls it fascism or something else, this is a priority for Trump and for Elon Musk. There's another factor in the Trump administration, and it's led by a man named Russell Vought, V-O-U-G-H-T, Russell Vought. He is the secretary of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. They control the federal budget, the $6.75 trillion. He's under the control of Vought. Vought is the author of Project 25. He is the architect of Project 2025. He is an ideologue and of a fascist type. Russell Vought believes that the Democratic Party is a Marxist party. They believe that the Democratic Party is a communist Marxist party, and that they have taken control of the United States, and they have ruined the United States. So the agenda of Vought is basically to destroy the existing administrative, what they call the administrative state, or what Trump and other people earlier called the deep state. So they're laying off right now in the last few weeks. They have fired and will fire hundreds of thousands of federal workers. They are not just USAID, which is obviously a tool of imperialism for American influence. They are trying to basically gut and destroy big parts of the existing American government. So they want to change the form of governance in the United States. To what end? Basically, before the American civil rights movement, or what we would call a civil rights revolution, America was an apartheid state. Very similar to South Africa. White supremacy was a mass movement in the United States. When I was a child, you could see hospitals for whites only, restaurants whites only, water fountains whites only. This is in my own lifetime. White supremacy was a mass movement in the United States. When the U.S. passed the Civil Rights Movement, passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act in 1964 and 1965 that allowed black Americans to participate in the political process and economic processes, it created a mass fascist movement in the United States, but it was suppressed by the uprising of black America between 1965 and 1970. When Dr. Martin Luther King was killed on April 4th, 1968, 120 cities in the United States burned down. There was an insurrection of black America. And this had the effect of changing, in many ways, the form of governance in the United States. Not the basic core structure of capitalism, that's the same. The basic repressive state apparatus that Lenin talked about in State and Revolution, that nothing's changed. But there were profound changes in the United States. There was a cultural revolution of sorts whereby black people and women and Latinos could actually participate in political processes. There was the creation of environmental protections, even though they were inadequate. the water and the air. There was a palpable diminishing of pollution because of environmental protection, because of emission control. These people want to wipe all that out. They want to make America great again. Meaning they want to go back to the period before the Civil Rights Revolution. So the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, that's a stand-in word. You could put, instead of saying DEI, you could put Black America. Because their attacks on DEI are an attack on the Civil Rights Revolution that changed America in many profound ways. They want to make America great again, meaning to go back to an earlier era when people had no rights. This is an ambitious agenda, but it's their agenda. Right now, as we're meeting here, Republican Congress people are back in their home districts, and there are meetings taking place right now all over the United States. And hundreds and thousands of people are coming to these local meetings to condemn what Trump is doing. And the people who are coming are not simply Democrats. There are many who voted for Trump himself. They had no idea that their vote for Trump meant that the National Park Service was closing down in their area, that postal workers are being fired. I mean, Trump is planning to take over the Postal Service. That's 750,000 workers, and privatize it. These are workers who are all over America. So we are seeing the beginning of an organic resistance at the grassroots. It doesn't come from the Democratic Party, which has completely collapsed. The Democratic Party has completely collapsed. All right. That's on the home front, on the United States. I want to talk about foreign policy also. I agree with Vijay on the most important part of his argument, which is that the existing strategy of the United States in foreign policy has failed. But I want to take it in a slightly different way, which is, again, not disagreeing at all with Vijay, because I 100% agree with his point. But I want for us to understand what the change is, what the real change is, and why it's come about. Because it's not simply that the U.S. has changed. If we think of the world as how has U.S. policy changed without looking at other questions like why has Russia's policy changed? Why has China's policy changed? We won't really understand the current moment because it's not a unilateral, unipolar world. There are different competing centers of global power, or at least regional power, and they dialectically interact with each other in a way that has profoundly shifted an assessment of American foreign policy as represented by Trump. And in this sense, Trump is not an anomaly. In this sense, and I think this is the other point that Vijay was making about the rationality of Trump, that there is a sector of the ruling class that has reappraised American foreign policy and decided to go in a different direction. If you think about Henry Kissinger, who was a war criminal responsible for the carpet bombing of Vietnam, what was his attitude towards the Soviet Union? He wanted to meet with the Soviet Union. He wanted to take the Soviet Union as a national power, as an international power, seriously. He said the Soviet Union and Russia are too big. They can't be treated as neo-colonies. He said they have legitimate interests that have to be taken into account. That doesn't mean he's a man of peace. He is a war criminal. But he had a realistic assessment of global politics. What is Trump doing with Russia compared to what Kissinger did? It's not much different. It's not much different. Also, Kissinger made the argument that China is international force. It's too big, too many people, too developed, even back in 1971. So that even though Kissinger and Nixon went to China to bring China into an anti-Soviet alliance, which they succeeded in doing, it wasn't just that. It was that, but it wasn't just that. It was also a recognition that China must be dealt with as a serious, major force that is not going to disappear. You can't treat China and Russia simply by either ignoring them or hating them. You have to deal with them. So I think that when we look at what's actually happened with US policy, and I want to take a moment, I find it interesting and important, like, why did Russia change? Why did Russia invade Ukraine? What's the real reason? This was an epic-shaping decision. When Putin decided to invade Ukraine, he knew that the United States would impose economic sanctions, that Russia's assets would be seized, that Russia would be evicted from the world economy, dominated by the US. He knew all that. And yes, you can make the argument, and we make the argument for Russia in a way, that US provocations, the refusal to give Russia a guarantee that Ukraine would be a neutral country and not a staging ground for advanced weapons against Russia on its border. The fact that the US carried out this provocation made it likely and then, in a way, inevitable that Russia would take military action. Even right before the invasion, Biden and Blinken and Jake Sullivan, they were saying, Russia's going to invade. Russia's going to invade. But they didn't say it with any urgency. They didn't say, yeah, that's why we have to get back to the negotiating table and make sure that we meet Russia halfway, that we give them some guarantees that Ukraine won't be a staging ground for war against Russia. They didn't do that. Why? Because they wanted Russia to invade. Then the question is, well, we know why they did that, because then if they could evict Russia from the world economy, they could also cement all of Europe behind America. To the extent that there was uncertainty in Europe about NATO, that uncertainty ended. The US basically took all control over Europe once Russia invaded. But then the question is, why did Russia do it? And this is the point that I want to make. There was a turning point that all of us should be, I think, aware of in terms of what transformed Putin's thinking. And that was what happened in Libya in 2011. And I want to just take a moment to try to explain why I think this was a pivotal moment that changed Russia's thinking, and also eventually led to a US-Russia proxy war in Ukraine. Putin made a speech in Munich in 2007, and VJ wrote about this last week. And it was he was invited, tell us what you really think about the world situation. And Putin came to the Munich conference and he said, America's trying to dominate everyone. The United States is using all of its power, its military power, to suppress everyone else. It's not acceptable. And then in 2008, at the NATO summit in Bucharest, Romania, the United States announced that the US was going to include Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, these two former Soviet republics, vital to Russia. And Russia immediately moved troops into Georgia. That was April 2008 was the NATO summit. Russia invades Georgia in August 2008, right away. Putin was making it clear, we're not going to allow this to happen. But then Putin left office. Putin was no longer president of Russia in 2009. He became prime minister, and there was a new president, a new head of state, and his name is Dmitry Medvedev, and he's still now the prime minister. Medvedev in 2011, when the US and Britain and France wanted to begin bombing Libya, they went to the United Nations and they asked the Security Council for authorization, Resolution 1973, to authorize the use of force in Libya. And Russia and China, who have the veto and could have vetoed that resolution, abstained. They both abstained, which allowed the United States, Britain, and France to destroy Libya with the veneer, the mask, the camouflage, that it was a UN-authorized operation rather than US imperialism. And Putin at that time condemned Russia's abstention at the United Nations. Everybody thought, oh, Medvedev is simply the yes man for Putin. No, Putin said this was a terrible mistake. And Medvedev actually criticized Putin publicly in 2011. He said, you can't talk about America like that. And Putin said, this was a gross, terrible error. And what did the United States immediately do after they destroyed Libya? After they killed Gaddafi? They immediately said, on to Syria. Assad must go. And for Russia, nothing could be more important than the destruction of Syria in the Middle East, because that was the only place where Russia had a military base, and the Syrian government was basically the most important ally of earlier the Soviet Union and then Russia in the Middle East. And that's when Putin decided to run for re-election. That's when Putin comes back into office in 2013, and he has a new orientation, which is we are no longer going to go along with the unipolar policies of the United States that were established after 1991, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, that was after 8 years of having the US and this reactionary puppet government in Kiev destroy big parts of Ukraine, make a war against its own people, against Russian-speaking people in the east of Ukraine, and that's when Putin said, enough. This is important because the United States, and I'll finish here, Biden wanted Russia to invade, and Russia did invade, and then the desired outcome by the United States was completely unachievable. Instead of it realizing American dominance everywhere, Russia did not collapse. It strengthened its relationship with China, as Vijay pointed out. Many of the global South countries said, okay, we're not going along with the unipolar power either. They didn't support the Russian invasion, but they abstained. They continued and increased trade with Russia. And I think that now Donald Trump and this sector of the bourgeoisie, the sector of the American bourgeoisie, say it's a failed policy. We're going to go back really to the Kissinger policy of realism. Doesn't mean that they will be able to break China away from Russia. I doubt it. I don't think so. And one of the advantages compared to the 1960s was that Russia and China, Soviet Union and China in the 1960s were sister communist parties. So there was an ideological element to the split. It wasn't simply allies who didn't do enough for each other. There was a sense of betrayal on the part of the Chinese, and then a sense of ingratitude by the Soviet leadership that the Chinese were not grateful for all the help the Soviets had provided China. So the poisonous, toxic debate split between Russia and China, degenerated political split that became a state-to-state split. Not like, comrade, I disagree with you. It's like, you're a fascist. You know, you're an imperialist. You know, this is a different problem. And this is what allowed Kissinger and Nixon to bring China into the orbit of US imperialism, was the toxic nature of the split. It wasn't just something between two countries. It was deeper, it was more profound, more ideological, more bitter. And I think Russia, and certainly China, having realized everything of the last 30 years, are going to do everything they can in their power to protect their alliance. Doesn't mean they won't give Trump something, they will. They'll say, oh, here, we have to placate Donald Trump because he's transactional. We have to give him something, but I doubt that the alliance will break. Final point, another issue that we have to pay attention to, comrades, is the rise of the right. We don't have to be demoralized about the rise of the right, but we have to fight the right. We have to fight it not by aligning ourselves with imperialism or centrism, but building a grassroots united front against fascism that has a positive program for workers and farmers everywhere. Thank you.
Great.